But this is the first time you're in Hungary. What's the perceptions you arrived with? What did you know beforehand? What do Americans think about Hungary?
So I would say that Americans who know about Hungary are sort of split on Hungary. If you read the legacy media, then apparently Hungary is a fascist state run by a dictator. And if you are a person who does not watch the legacy media or don't take seriously every headline from the New York Times, then Hungary is a democratic state that's attempting some new things with regard to promoting patriotism and nationalism in the country, a country that is small but growing in its economic power, a country that is more oriented against the internationalism of the EU and sort of balancing between East and West in a wide variety of ways. I would say that the legacy media somehow has made people dumber about Hungary. And I'd say alternative media, as a general rule, has made people a little bit smarter about Hungary.
Hungarians. For us Hungarians, it was an extremely interesting thing when during the campaign, Donald Trump, we counted, mentioned more than 100 times the name of Viktor Orbán, brought Hungary as an example. Why did he do this? Hungarians were asking, have we become so important, less than 10 million inhabitant country in the middle of Europe?
Well, I think that President Trump has very personal relationships with a wide variety of other leaders, and then he makes foreign policy very often based on those personal relationships. So if he feels a sort of warm orientation toward a particular political leader, then he will mention that leader a lot. And Viktor Orbán, obviously, Prime Minister here, he and President Trump are pretty close personally. They're very friendly. And so President Trump will use the Prime Minister's support as evidence that he has international support in a wide variety of ways. And you'll see the president do this now with, for example, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia as well. He's done it historically with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. He does it with Javier Milei in Argentina. He used to do it with Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. So the president does make a lot of his sort of decisions based on gut instinct and also a formation of a personal relationship with particular politicians. And meanwhile, you'll see that if he really doesn't like a politician, then that person will get mentioned a lot in the opposite context. I think that's something that, for example, Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine has had to deal with. The president obviously had a sort of instinctive dislike toward Vladimir Zelensky. He was very not warm toward Zelensky. Zelensky's trying to make overtures now. And so there's a lot of the personal and the political of President Trump.
Or your impressions about Viktor Orbán. We can reveal to the audience that you just had an interview with the Hungarian Prime Minister. What were your impressions? What was the experience like?
I mean, highly intelligent, really understands his own philosophy, which is something you can't really say about a lot of world leaders. There are a lot of world leaders who don't have a lot of fluency with their own ideas. They don't have sort of a deep wellspring of worldview that they're drawing from. And I think the Prime Minister obviously does. He's thought these issues through in a pretty significant way. And that means that he's very fluid talking about those issues. There are some world leaders where you talk to them, and if you ask one question below the surface, they don't know how to answer the question because they haven't really thought it through. They're just doing policy. They're not really understanding the philosophical groundwork. He clearly likes talking about the philosophical groundwork of his own positions. And so many of the questions that I was asking, which were about policy, he would immediately take kind of below the surface level and start talking about the deeper philosophical concerns that lie at the root of the policy discussion. I think that's a unique characteristic for sure. Also, yeah, again, I think that he understands the criticisms that he undergoes very well. I think that he is up on those criticisms. He's an impressive figure, for sure.
What should a politician be like? I mean, what we're seeing on the one hand in Hungary, more and more social media, short videos are rampant. People are communicating through this. Young people, this is what they get their political information from. Is it good if a politician is able to go to the depths and does have a philosophical kind of content, or nowadays it's just unnecessary and it's just enough if you remain at the level of short videos and you have a strong communicator?
I mean, in terms of actual communication strategy to young people, obviously everything happens in TikTok 30-second viral sound bites. But in terms of actual governance, I do think it's quite important for a leader to have a thorough worldview, because that way they understand what they're doing. If the leader doesn't understand what he's doing, if he's just kind of randomly picking fruit off the policy tree, you end up with inconsistency and uncertainty and confusion, and that breeds uncertainty and inconsistency and confusion in the population and in the global reaction to that politician. And so there has to be some anchoring worldview, I think, for any successful leader to really be able to effectuate policy in a truly creative and effective way. And so it's sort of two different questions. What makes you popular in the world of social media is, of course, the 30-second videos, the evocative stuff. But you really want your leaders to be able to discuss beyond that and to get to those root issues and explain what they're doing.
Let's talk a bit about the conservative movement, the whole word movement. Can I use this notion? 20, 30 years ago, we would not have said that. We would have called the leftist the movement for centuries. Nowadays, however, what has become palpable is conservatives, even here at CPAC, they are rallying from around the world, east, west, all kinds of continents. What has happened in recent times? You are one of the key figures of this movement in the United States. So from one of the opinion leaders, Donald Trump, Viktor Orbán, also, what has changed during the past decades, that conservatives also now at the international level are organizing according to values? What has changed?
So I think what's happened is that the left absolutely lost its mind and pushed everybody over a cliff. So the left deciding, for example, that mass migration into Europe was an absolute necessity for the European continent and for all the national cultures of Europe. Totally insane. And that was obviously going to create tremendous pushback. The secular left deciding that boys could be girls and girls could be boys. And if you said that that wasn't true, then you had to be excised from public life. That obviously was going to draw enormous blowback. The COVID policies, which were totally uncalibrated in so many ways, many of the lies that were told about COVID in the United States and abroad, the sort of racial polarization that has been pursued by the left in the United States and that bled over into Europe as well. All these policies have been exposed over the course of the last 15 or 20 years as not only insane, but also that the people who push those policies then try to censor people who criticize those policies in the name of democracy, in the name of liberalism. And so that, of course, is creating an anti-left pushback. And so one thing that I would say is that what we're watching, I think, globally, it's happening in the United States as well, is a coalitional anti-left movement. I'm not sure that it's a consolidated conservative movement because I'm not sure that there is tremendous agreement in that anti-left movement on sort of central principles. So you'll see wide variations on principle with regard to, say, foreign policy. Are we more isolationist on the conservative right, or are we more kind of hawkish realist on the conservative right? When it comes to markets, are we more free market, private property oriented, or are we more interventionist in the economy on behalf of specified populations or institutions? Right? These are all very open debates that are happening on the right in the so-called conservative movement. The one consolidation point is that they are opposing everything the left does. So I think what you're seeing is a very strong anti-left movement. Does that mean that there's always common cause between, say, National Rally in France and Viktor Orban's party in Hungary, or or the Meloni party in Italy, or Trump's Republican Party? Like, there's some crossover, but that Venn diagram is not a circle. There's a lot of areas of disagreement, even within that sort of broader anti-left coalition.
Is it a counter-revolution?
Yes. I think that's a great way to put it. It is a counter-revolution. The left had its own revolution, and now there's a counter-revolution taking place. Now, the good news is that it's deeply necessary. The danger in any revolution or counter-revolution is that when the pendulum is swinging this wildly, you could, in fact, go too far in one direction and start experimenting with policies that are failures, or you could push too hard in the direction of, say in reaction to the so-called globalized economy. You decide that you want to push in favor of protectionism and autarky. That reaction would not be good for the country that pursues it, but you can see why it's a reaction. And so, I would prefer a counter-revolution with specified principles. I want an American counter-revolution, not a French counter-revolution.
What do you think about Europe? We often say, Europeans say that what is happening in America is with a few years delay, decade, later will happen in Europe as well, politically as well. But if we look at it now, the European Union is getting tougher and tougher on Hungary or the previous Polish government. Whenever anybody from among the conservatives got closer to power and did not stand in line in this European superstate, then immediately there was rejection, I could dare say punishment, like Hungary is being punished 1 million euros per day because of another kind of migration policy being followed then from the European Union, has been since 2015 under the Germans. That was prescribed. How do you see the European Union? Do you think this resistance is going to be stronger and the European mainstream will prevail, the present one? Or what happens usually will happen is with a few years of delay, here again, there will be a new Trump-like leadership in Europe. We can expect patriots to take over the European Union?
I think that you are going to see a patriotic upswing in Europe. I think that there's been an attempt to hold that back, particularly by the parties who are sort of in the middle. So to take France as an example, National Rally continues to gain vote share in France. But then Emmanuel Macron, instead of actually making common cause with National Rally or trying to come to some sort of agreement with National Rally, he instead swung over all the way to Mélenchon, who's an insane, psychotic left-winger. And so the attempt to stop National Rally was more important to him than the fact that supposedly his party should probably agree on policy more with the National Rally Party than it agrees with Mélenchon. And you see the same thing sort of happening all over the place, right? In Great Britain, you're seeing the rise of Nigel Farage's party as a replacement for the Tory party because the Tories have fallen down on the job. Are the Tories going to make common cause and actually try to co-opt some of the support that Farage is gaining? Or are they going to move closer to the moderate left and then make common cause with, say, Labour or the Liberal Party in Britain? Like, totally unclear at this point. I do think that the attempts to hold back that wave are only going to be successful for so long, because at a certain point, if the bad policy continues to manifest, if the policies of Emmanuel Macron continue to stink in France, National Rally is only going to continue to gain more and more credibility. You're seeing that in the Netherlands. You're seeing that in Italy. You're seeing that in a wide variety of places. And the constant drumbeat that if a party you don't like wins, that it's undemocratic, that democracy has been overthrown, I think it's becoming very irritating to a lot of people. Now, President Trump talks a lot about the deep state, but the deep state is not just in the United States, the attempt to sort of overthrow his priorities from within the government. The deep state exists in a wide variety of places. The attempt by the French courts to stop Marine Le Pen from being able to run, or the attempts by members of the Israeli government to stop Benjamin Netanyahu from being able to hire his own Shin Bet chief, for example. You know, there's all sorts of sort of iterations of this happening. The campaign against Jair Bolsonaro legally in Brazil, while they're reinstating Lula da Silva, who literally was in jail 5 minutes ago in Brazil, so that he can be the president of Brazil. You know, that sort of activity is going to start irritating the public more and more and more, and it's making it worse. I mean, the truth is that if you want democracy to be the byword, then when you lose, you still have to uphold the democracy. You can't just say that it's only democracy when you win. Otherwise, that's not a democracy. That's just you dictating to everybody else.
Well, what can we do in such a situation in Europe? I mean, we can see these developments. We can see AFDs being pressurized in Germany. They have been dubbed a far-right group. The next step could be banning them. We saw the Romanian elections where simply they just annulled the result, the election result, and many other examples. In Austria also, some developments like this. How do you think we and the conservative movement should react?
I mean, I think that the dangers of history show that if you try to completely overthrow any of the institutions in an attempt to correct them, you sometimes end up with a cure that's worse than the disease. With that said, you know, sometimes, you know, the sort of, let's put it this way, the rhetoric is going to get more heated. The movement, the counter-revolution is going to get stronger, and the attempt by the left and the center left to sort of hold back the tide by holding back democracy, it's not going to end well. I mean, there's an inevitability to the idea of using tools to suppress democratic votes and then to suggest that you're upholding democracy in the process. And when the blowback comes, it will be in the form of a Trumpish figure. It'll be in the form of somebody that the left really, really doesn't like. They could have made common cause with some of these parties and actually tried to come to some sort of consolidated answer on some of these things, bring them into the government, for example, as I say in France, or try to find out what about AfD is so appealing in Germany. Right? AfD, I think, has done actually a fairly decent job of excising some of its more radical elements, specifically to become a more mainstream party, and yet was treated as absolute anathema by the world press as a Nazi-esque party, even though it's led by a pro-Israel lesbian. Like none of it makes any sense. But the more you try to hold back the tide, it's King Canute. You can't hold back the tide. If the tide is coming, the tide is coming.
And then you say that, for example, the CDU, which has again entered into coalition with the left, and I think they would have even gone for the Greens, who are even more left. Sooner or later, they will just, do you think they will say, I will accept the will of the people, let them have the rightist government? I mean, that's what happened in Austria. The majority wanted a rightist government with the People's Party and the Freedom Party. Instead, they decided to push for the will of the minority. Do you think these parties will ever acquiesce?
If they don't, something really ugly is going to happen. And that's not a threat, because I wouldn't want to threaten anything like that. I don't want to see it happen. But I just don't understand how you can continue to ignore the will of the people over and over and over on behalf of minority governments that can barely cobble together a minority coalition just to survive a no confidence vote, and then hope that there will be no blowback. Like, the blowback is going to come. And and again, you're playing a dangerous game. And the funny thing is that the left understands this when they're talking about the right. So the left will say that the right is playing dangerous games with democracy if the right suppresses particular elements of the left. And I don't think that's false, but I think that if the left does the same thing with actual voting blocks, then they're likely to receive a sort of counter-revolution, as you call it, in a form that they don't like and I don't think will be particularly salutary for the countries involved.
Let's talk a bit about America. A few months ago, Donald Trump and his government has been in office for a few months. We here in Hungary, Hungarian readers, remember the huge, big, felt tip ban with which he's signing his executive orders. So there's a completely new thing happening, something new administration, new style is in town. How would you assess this domestically and from a foreign policy perspective? The first one.
So I think that President Trump's administration is still taking shape. There's a lot of robust debate, shall we say, inside his administration about everything from trade policy to tax policy to foreign policy. I think a lot of us who supported President Trump, and I campaigned for President Trump, I raised money for President Trump, I voted for President Trump, I openly supported him, I campaigned with 6 Senate candidates. Like, I was very active in the last election cycle trying to get President Trump elected. I think a lot of us were looking for Trump 1.0. I really liked the policy of Trump 1.0 up through about 2019. And that was a very heavily free market-oriented economic plan, very pro-business, a foreign policy that was sort of classically peace through strength without being interventionist and Wilsonian in its approach. That's what I was looking for. And I think that right now it's kind of unclear what shape the administration is taking. So there are some things he's doing that I think are absolutely wonderful. I think his attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, which is effectively an attack on racism in the United States. That's very, very good. His attack on gender ideology in the United States, terrific, wonderful. His attacks on the universities for violating the Civil Rights Act, I think that's really good. I think that his immigration policy, shutting the southern border and actually attempting to deport criminally illegal immigrants, that's excellent as well. And then there are areas where, frankly, I'm a little confused. I think that his trade policy doesn't make a lot of sense to me. If you're trying to isolate China, then you actually need to take a number of steps that he didn't do. And you certainly don't need to try to originally throw a 46% tariff on Vietnam, or try to throw a tariff on Hungary, or throw a tariff on allies of the United States in order to effectuate a tariff on China, if that's what you're attempting to do. When it comes to his foreign policy, again, I'm a little bit confused as to what his foreign policy actually is at this point. It's unclear to me. So he came into office, for example, on Russia-Ukraine, pledging that he was going to bring that war to an end, which, great. I think everybody would like for that war to come to an end if you're of good heart. I've been calling for an end to that war since August of 2022. I took the sort of Henry Kissinger position that there needed to be a freezing of the lines, and that there would be essentially a guarantee that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO, but there would be security guarantees to Ukraine so that Ukraine wouldn't be further invaded by Russia. There could be theoretically a gradual movement toward the EU by Ukraine, but it would essentially be an armistice. And I've been calling for that since 2022. The question right now is that President Trump has not made clear whether he's going to continue to support Ukraine, whether he's going to withdraw totally from the conflict, leaving Ukraine sort of naked to predations from the Russians, whether he's going to up the ante with the Russians. Any of those possibilities are still on the table, right? Any of those things could still be I don't know.
Let's talk a bit later on about the Russian-Ukrainian war, because it's happening in our backyard. But another thing I'd like to reflect on universities. What we were reading here in the mainstream media is Trump is actually destroying the best university system in the world, Harvard, bringing down the major universities. Hungarian students should not even dream of ever studying in those schools. What's the reality? What is actually happening in this academic system? What's his objective?
So right now, he's using levers in order to get Harvard to change the way that it does business. So Harvard, according to President Trump, and I think according to the law, has violated the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution in its admission process. It's been racist in how it's done admissions. They also claim, correctly, that the Civil Rights Act is a guarantee, whether you like it or not. This is what the law says. There's a guarantee against discrimination on the basis of race, religion, and a wide variety of other immutable characteristics in the law, and that includes discrimination against Jews. And Harvard created a discriminatory environment by making room for pro-terrorist, pro-Hamas people on campus to basically prevent Jews from being able to get to class, threatened actual physical violence, in some cases materialized physical violence against Jews. And so the Trump administration came in and they said, you need to fix all of this stuff or the money goes away. And Harvard basically said, no, we're not going to fix any of that stuff. And so Trump said, okay, well, then more of the money is going to go away. And they said, we're still not going to fix it. So fine, all the money is going to go away. And so, you know, what's happening right now is a bit of a dance. Harvard could work with President Trump to fix this. That's what they should do. If that doesn't happen, then President Trump is going to continue to up the ante. Now, do I want to see Harvard destroyed? I'm an alum, right? I went to Harvard Law School. So, I mean, I don't really want to see Harvard completely destroyed, but I do want to see them change the way they do business in accordance with the law. And I don't want to see research grants withdrawn from actual areas of real research. But there are a lot of research grants that are going to complete nonsense at Harvard to study gender non-binary rats and such. Like, we don't need that. So, you know, I think that all the money should be looked at. I think that the university system in the United States, there are parts of it that are wonderful.
Was there ever such a thing?
I mean, there have been studies. There literally was a study with regard to gender fluidity, I believe, in mice. I think that was one of the studies that was funded. I'm not sure if it was at Harvard, but it was at the Ivy Leagues. There's an awful lot of money that gets wasted in these spaces. When people think of the great American university system, what they really mean is in the STEM fields, typically. They mean in science, technology, engineering, and math. They typically don't mean in the sociology department or the gender studies department. And right now, the federal government subsidizes people to go get a degree in absolute nonsense. And that actually has to stop. And so I would like to retain the best parts of the American university system. And I would like to defund the worst parts of the American university system. Right now, President Trump seems to be sometimes threatening to defund all of it in order to get to the proposed solution. So I would like to see him get to that proposed solution in the end. I don't think he wants America's university system to be bad. I also think that he's having some populist fun by saying that he's going to take money away from Harvard and give it to like local trade schools on behalf of blue-collar workers, for example. I think that's a smart political play. Again, I don't think he actually wants to full-on destroy the R&D capacities of America's universities.
Let's talk about the Russian-Ukrainian war. This is really direct neighborhood of ours. There's a Hungarian minority living in Ukraine who are actually fighting in the trenches, day after day, dying. A lot of people have fled, Hungarians included, Ukraine. This has been more than 3 years now. Do you think the incumbent Biden administration at the time made a mistake when the war erupted? Do you think anything could have been done to actually short fuse this, like they did in 2014? Or, I mean, this was the way it had to be, that such a protracted war was calculated?
No, I mean, there was an off-ramp that was available in summer 2022. So shortly after the beginning of the war, when it became clear that Russia had failed in its ambitions to grab Kyiv and the entire territory, and the Russians were back-footed, there was a moment in time where Putin actually was willing to come to the table because he felt like he was losing. And when he felt like he was losing, he was willing to come to the table. And that's when everybody should have come to the table. The United States really should have said, listen, to Ukraine, we understand that atrocities have been performed against your country by the Russian military. We understand that you want Donbass back. We understand you want Crimea back. But those things aren't on the table right now. Those things are not happening. We need to go for an off-ramp. This is the point that Henry Kissinger, the former Secretary of State, was making in August or June of 2022, and I agreed with that. I think that was right. I think the big problem with the Biden administration is that they wanted it both ways. On the one hand, they didn't want to actually suggest what the off-ramp would look like, so they wouldn't set a goal. They wouldn't say, okay, the goal is to freeze the lines in place, to provide security guarantees to Ukraine sufficient so they don't get overwhelmed by the Russians, to provide a pathway forward for them economically, possible further integration with Europe, but that's the off-ramp, and so we're going to ramp up funding to get to that off-ramp. Instead, what they did is they said, we're just going to ramp up funding, and then we're going to let Ukraine define victory. Well, if you're Vladimir Zelensky, how do you go back to your people and say, okay, we're just surrendering Donbass and Crimea? You can't do that. I mean, there's no way for you to do that politically. So it would have required the United States to take an actual leadership position. Joe Biden wasn't willing to do that. And so he got the worst of both worlds. He was not funding them sufficient to actually stop the Russian war machine dead. Like, he wasn't giving them the Javelin missiles that they required. He wasn't giving them air cover. He wasn't giving them any of the things that they would have actually needed to, quote unquote, win the war. But then he also wouldn't define victory. So it was kind of a mess.
What was your gut feeling with Zelensky after your discussions? When do you think the war will end? What would we count on? What can we expect of Putin or Trump?
I mean, I would have rather had a gut reaction to Putin. I mean, to me, the ball is in Putin's court. I mean, I think Zelensky knows that he requires European and American support. And he also understands that there's a clock on that. And so he's ready to get to an off-ramp. I don't think that it's really up to Zelensky at this point. I think that it's really more up to Vladimir Putin. And again, I've never spoken with the president of Russia. I have doubts that he'd want me to speak to him, given my position on Russia's sort of expansionist tendencies historically. But with that said, yeah, I think that the attempt to put pressure on Zelensky has achieved its goal. He's willing to do all the things. From what I can tell, and from my conversation with Zelensky, I don't see where he is being particularly intransigent, as opposed to Putin, who, again, has yet to actually offer a material thing in exchange for an armistice.
Recently, a book was published by Jake Tapper, Original Sin, he's not saying, but they talk clearly, openly about his status, mental status, the problems he was struggling with while he was in office. When I was watching CNN before, I always saw everything was all right. I mean, this was just a Contío if you were talking about Biden's shortfalls. Even, I mean, he could safely just do one more term in office. What happened? If they knew, why were they covering this up? Or was it actually, what's the reality?
So I think that to be charitable, what you can say is that members of the Biden administration absolutely knew. Right? I mean, that book makes perfectly clear that everyone around Joe Biden absolutely 100% knew. Other people had very strong indicators, shall we say, and they decided that it was more important to try and push a dead president to victory, like a vegetable to victory, than it was to actually tell the American people the truth. And so they just didn't ask the questions. The most charitable version is they didn't ask the questions they certainly would have asked if it were Donald Trump staggering around stages, being guided off stage by the Easter Bunny, which is the thing that actually happened with Joe Biden at an Easter egg roll. I mean, if that had been Trump, they'd be all over it. They'd be asking those questions. The media was complicit, at the very least, in not asking serious questions. And then you can make the accusation that many members of the media were around him, and they kind of knew, and they just decided that they weren't going to cover it, and that it was bad to cover it. I think the media, this story more than any other story, has completely exposed the American media for what they are, an agitprop wing of the Democratic Party.
What young people think about the world, and what the majority of people think about the world, the Daily Wire has a huge impact. How did you build it? How did you come up with the idea? And I have this favorite quote from you, the title of your book, Don't Care About Emotions. What's the basic message? What's the core message? Why was this one of the most important messages of recent times for your readers' audience?
So I think that the reason that facts don't care about your feelings, that slogan, which I sort of uttered randomly in a debate over transgenderism, actually, on CNN Headline News when I was being manhandled by a man who believed he was a woman. The reason that I think resonated for so many people is because, as I mentioned before, the left lost its mind over the course of the last 10, 15 years. And because of that, they were saying things based on emotion that were not rooted in fact. And so when I would make a perfectly factual statement, and then that would be rejected with kind of reeing and screeching by the left, I think a lot of people reacted to that and said, okay, well, why are they getting so crazy over basic facts like boys are not girls, for example, or like America is not actually a particularly racist country. In fact, it's one of the most non-racist countries on planet Earth. Like those sorts of statements are just factually based in data, and I can provide studies and data that show you all those things are true. And so I think that people felt connected to reality again. And this is one of the things that I hope our company has stood for, is the idea that we live in reality. We want everything that we say to be rooted in a factual worldview that actually takes facts seriously. And this is one of the reasons why, I don't think that, Daily Wire is only fighting the left. I think that there's a conspiratorial right that also is fond of trafficking in rumors and in sort of grievance mongering that is not rooted in fact. And I think that that's bad too. I don't think that it's quite to the same extent that the left has been completely taken over by it. But you can't have actual real discussions with people unless you at least agree on the factual basis that you're drawing your opinions from. Otherwise, you're just yelling at each other.
What's your plan with Daily Wire for the future, to turn it into the greatest media company in the U.S.?
I mean, that's certainly the plan. I mean, right now we are, by the numbers, the second largest conservative media company in the country after Fox News. We're looking forward to continuing to expand, find new talents, increase the brand reach of our current talent, move into some new areas. Obviously, we've gotten into the entertainment area. We'd like to do more in that area, everything ranging from movies to TV series. The goal is to provide a media counter-revolution, you might say, to the legacy media that is large enough to actually take on the legacy media in a real and abiding way.
Next year, elections in Hungary. What do you wish the Hungarian right, and what advice do you have for them for success?
I mean, I spoke with the Prime Minister earlier, and I asked him what advice he had for Americans, and I thought his answer was good. I don't have any advice for Americans. They're a sovereign country. My advice for Hungary, you're a sovereign country. I will say that Hungary is trying something that is very different from the rest of Europe, and it's the reason why I, as an Orthodox Jew, can walk around Budapest with my yarmulke on and not worry about being attacked. It is the reason why you've seen fairly consistent economic growth in this country. It's the reason why I think there's optimism in Hungary. So what I would suggest is that the Hungarian people take a look at what the record of the current government is, see if they like it or not, and then continue to maintain support for the government if they like it, and make their voices heard if there are aspects of it that they wish changed. But overall, again, if you're going to compare contrast Hungary to many of the other countries in Europe, the trajectory of Hungary looks a hell of a lot better than the trajectory of a lot of the other countries that I've been visiting around the region.
Ben Shapiro, thank you very much for the interview.